The old pickup truck made a sound like it was dying as it climbed the long driveway. The engine coughed and sputtered, and the man behind the wheel whispered a quiet prayer that it would hold together just a little longer. He had driven 6 hours to get here, and breaking down now, in front of this massive house, would be the final embarrassment in a life that had already seen plenty of them. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter pressed her face against the window. Her eyes went wide as the mansion came into full view. It looked like something from a movie. Tall white columns held up a porch that wrapped around the entire front of the house. The windows were so clean they sparkled in the afternoon sun. The lawn was perfectly green, perfectly cut, like someone had used scissors on every single blade of grass. "Daddy," the little girl whispered, "do people really live here?" He looked at her in the rearview mirror and managed a small smile. "They do, sweetheart. This is where your great-great-grandmother lived." The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. The rabbit was missing one eye and had been stitched back together so many times it looked like a patchwork quilt, but she refused to sleep without it, and he had learned long ago not to argue about the things that brought her comfort. He parked the truck at the far end of the circular driveway, away from the Mercedes and BMWs that sat near the front entrance like shiny trophies. His truck looked like a wounded animal that had wandered into a palace by mistake. He could already feel the stairs coming, even though no one was outside yet. For a moment, he just sat there, hands still on the steering wheel. His palms were sweating. He had not seen anyone from his grandmother's side of the family in 15 years. Not since his mother had been cut off from them completely. Not since they had called her a disgrace for marrying his father, a man who worked with his hands and came home every night with grease under his fingernails. His mother had never talked badly about them. Even when money was tight, even when they struggled to pay rent, she never cursed their name or wished them harm. She simply said that some people measure worth in dollars, and others measure it in love. She had chosen love. Now his mother was gone. His father was gone too, taken by a heart attack 3 years after her. And somehow, against all odds, a letter had found its way to his small apartment above the auto repair shop where he worked. His grandmother Eleanor had passed away, and he was invited to the reading of her will. He almost threw the letter away. What could that woman possibly have to say to him now? She had never reached out while his mother was alive. She had never sent a birthday card to her great-granddaughter. She had let his mother die without ever saying she was sorry. But his daughter had found the letter in the trash. She had asked him what it was, and he had made the mistake of telling her. Her eyes had lit up with curiosity. She wanted to know about the family she had never met. She wanted to see the big house. She wanted to understand where she came from. So here they were. He stepped out of the truck and walked around to help his daughter down. She was wearing her best dress, a yellow one with small white flowers that they had bought at a thrift store last spring. He was wearing a borrowed blazer that was slightly too big in the shoulders and work boots that he had scrubbed for an hour the night before. They still had stains that would not come out. Together, father and daughter walked up the stone steps to the front door. He could hear voices inside, muffled laughter, the clinking of glasses. The door was answered by a man in a black suit who looked at them like they were lost. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice dripping with doubt. "I'm here for the reading of the will. I'm Eleanor's grandson." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at the clipboard in his hand, scanned the names, and then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. "Down the hall. The parlor is on your left." The inside of the house was even more overwhelming than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. Oil paintings in golden frames lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced men and women who looked like they had never smiled a day in their lives. The floors were marble, and his work boots squeaked against them with every step. His daughter gripped his hand tighter. "Daddy, I don't like it here," she whispered. "It's too quiet." He squeezed her hand back. "I know, sweetheart. We won't stay long, I promise." The parlor was filled with people he did not recognize. They stood in small groups, holding wine glasses and speaking in hushed tones. When he walked in, every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes landed on him and his daughter like they were intruders who had broken in through a window. A woman in a red dress stepped forward. She was tall and thin, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her jewelry probably cost more than everything he owned combined. She looked at him the way someone might look at a stain on an expensive carpet. "Well," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "this must be the long-lost grandson." She turned to an older woman beside her and let out a laugh that was sharp and cold. Eleanor must have completely lost her mind at the end. "Look at him." He felt his face grow hot, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago that words rarely changed minds like hers. Instead, he guided his daughter to an empty chair in the corner, as far from the others as possible. She climbed up and held her rabbit close, watching the room with wide, cautious eyes. The woman in the red dress was still staring at him. "I'm Victoria," she said, though she did not offer her hand. "Eleanor's actual granddaughter, the one who was actually here for her." She gestured around the room at the others. "We all were. And you show up now? After 15 years of nothing?" He met her gaze, but kept his voice calm. "I was invited, same as everyone else." Victoria laughed again, that same cruel sound. "Invited, right. Well, don't get your hopes up. Whatever you think you're getting, you're not." Eleanor knew who her real family was. He did not respond. He simply sat down next to his daughter and put his arm around her. She leaned into him, and he could feel her small body trembling slightly. She was scared. She did not understand why these people were being so mean to her father. The family attorney arrived a few minutes later, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a leather briefcase. He asked everyone to take their seats, and the room slowly settled into an uneasy silence. "Before I begin," the attorney said, "I want to make it clear that Eleanor spent considerable time on this document. Her wishes were very specific, and they are legally binding." Victoria crossed her arms and smiled like she had already won. The attorney opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Eleanor has divided her estate into conditional portions. Each potential heir will be required to complete a task. These tasks were designed by Eleanor herself. Only those who complete their tasks successfully will receive their inheritance." A murmur went through the room. This was unexpected. The attorney continued reading. Victoria would have to demonstrate financial expertise. An uncle would have to prove his charitable work. An aunt would have to show her social contributions. And then the attorney turned to him. "For you," the attorney said, adjusting his glasses, "Eleanor has requested that you perform a piano recital. Specifically, you must play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." The room exploded with laughter. Victoria nearly doubled over. "A piano recital?" she gasped between laughs. "He's a mechanic. He fixes cars for a living. He probably doesn't even know what a piano looks like." His daughter tugged at his sleeve, her eyes filled with worry. "Daddy?" "What's happening?" He looked down at her and smiled softly. Then he looked up at the laughing faces, the people who had written him off before he even spoke. They had no idea who his mother was. They had no idea what she had taught him. They had no idea what he could do. 3 weeks, the attorney said over the noise. "You have 3 weeks to prepare." He nodded once. 3 weeks. It was not much time to resurrect something he had buried years ago. But for his daughter, for his mother's memory, he would try. He would show them all. The laughter followed him out of the mansion and stayed with him the entire drive home. 6 hours on the road, and he could still hear it ringing in his ears. Victoria's sharp, mocking voice, the snickers from uncles and aunts he had never met. the way they had looked at his daughter like she did not belong there. She had fallen asleep in the back seat about an hour into the drive, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, watching the rise and fall of her small chest. She was the reason he had kept going all these years. She was the reason he got up every morning, even when his body ached and his heart felt heavy. Her mother had left when she was only 2 years old, just walked out one night and never came back. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. He had spent months waiting for her to return, making excuses, telling himself she just needed time. But time passed, and the truth became impossible to ignore. She was gone, and she was not coming back, so he raised his daughter alone. He learned to braid her hair by watching videos on his phone. He learned to cook meals that were not just canned soup and sandwiches. He learned to be both father and mother, to kiss scraped knees and chase away nightmares and answer questions about why other kids had mommies and she did not. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. It was also the best thing he had ever done. Now, as the highway stretched out before him in the darkness, he thought about what the attorney had said, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Just hearing those words had sent a shiver down his spine. Not because he did not know the piece. He knew it better than almost any other music in the world. His mother had played it for him when he was a child. She would sit at the old piano in their small living room, her fingers dancing across the keys like they had a life of their own. He would sit beside her on the bench, watching in amazement, not understanding how anyone could make something so beautiful out of a wooden box with black and white keys. She had been a concert pianist once, before she met his father. She had trained at one of the best music schools in the country, performed in concert halls that seated thousands of people. Critics had called her a rising star, a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent. Then she fell in love with a mechanic from a small town, and her family gave her a choice. Him or them, the money or the man, the mansion or the modest life. She chose love. She chose his father, and she never once said she regretted it. But she never stopped playing. Even after she was cut off from her family's wealth, even after they moved into a tiny apartment and counted every penny, she found ways to keep music in their lives. She gave piano lessons to neighborhood kids for extra money. She played at churches and community centers for free. And every single night, after dinner, she would sit at that old piano and fill their home with music. She started teaching him when he was 4 years old. At first, it was just simple scales, exercises to train his small fingers. But he learned fast, faster than she expected. By the time he was 8, he was playing pieces that most teenagers struggled with. By 12, he was performing at local competitions and winning. By 16, he had been offered scholarships to music conservatories. His mother cried when he got those letters. Happy tears, she said. Proud tears. She told him he had a gift, and that gifts were meant to be shared with the world. He went to music school. He studied and practiced and pushed himself harder than he ever had before. After graduation, he joined a small chamber orchestra and spent 3 years traveling, performing, living the dream his mother had always wanted for him. Then 2 things happened that changed everything. First, his mother got sick. Cancer, the doctors said, advanced and aggressive. She fought hard, but the disease was stronger. He was holding her hand when she took her last breath, and something inside him broke that day, something that had never fully healed. Second, 6 months after her death, he injured his hand. It happened at a rehearsal, a freak accident involving a heavy music stand and a moment of carelessness. The damage to his tendons was severe. Doctors said he might regain most of his mobility, but the precision required for professional piano playing would likely be gone forever. He tried anyway. For months, he tried. He did the physical therapy, the exercises, the endless stretching and strengthening. But his fingers would not cooperate. They trembled when they should have been steady. They stumbled over passages that used to flow effortlessly. The music that had once poured out of him now came out broken and wrong. So he stopped. He sold most of his things, moved back to his hometown, and got a job at the auto shop where his father had worked years before. He buried his grief in engine grease and long hours. He told himself that chapter of his life was over. Then his daughter came along, and he had a new reason to live. But he still could not bring himself to play. The piano sat in the corner of their small apartment, covered with a sheet like a ghost from another lifetime. His daughter had asked about it many times, and he always changed the subject. It hurt too much to explain. Now, as he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building, he realized he had no choice. If he wanted to honor his mother's memory, if he wanted to show his daughter that her father was more than what those rich people saw, he would have to face the ghost under the sheet. He carried his sleeping daughter up the stairs and tucked her into bed. He kissed her forehead and whispered that he loved her. Then he walked into the living room and stood in front of the covered piano. His hands were shaking as he pulled the sheet away. Dust rose into the air, floating in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The piano looked exactly as it had 8 years ago, the last time he had touched it. The wood was worn in places, the keys slightly yellowed with age, but it was still his mother's piano. It still held her memory in every scratch and dent. He sat down on the bench. The leather was cracked, but it felt familiar. He placed his fingers on the keys, and for a long moment he did not move. He just sat there, feeling the cool ivory beneath his fingertips, remembering. Then he pressed down. The note that came out was slightly out of tune, but it was there, real and solid and alive. He pressed another key, then another. His fingers were stiff and clumsy, tripping over each other like they had forgotten how to work together. The sounds that came out were rough, nothing like the music he used to make. But he kept going. He played scales, simple ones, the same exercises his mother had taught him when he was 4 years old. He played them over and over, feeling his muscles slowly wake up from their long sleep. He did not notice that his daughter had gotten out of bed. She had heard the sounds and followed them to the living room. Now she stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her rabbit, watching her father with wide eyes. "Daddy?" she said softly. "I didn't know you could play piano." He turned to look at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "I used to," he said. "A long time ago, before you were born." She walked over and climbed onto the bench beside him. "Can you teach me?" He looked at her, this beautiful little girl who had given his life meaning when everything else had fallen apart. She was looking up at him with such hope, such trust. She believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I can." They sat there together in the dim light, father and daughter, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of loss. And for the first time in 8 years, the apartment was filled with music again. It was not perfect. It was not even close. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is all you need. The first week was brutal. He woke up at 4 in the morning every day, 2 hours before his shift at the auto shop started. He would make coffee, sit down at the piano, and practice until his fingers ached and his eyes burned from exhaustion. Then he would shower, wake his daughter, make her breakfast, drop her off at school, and head to work. 8 hours of fixing cars, 8 hours of crawling under vehicles, changing oil, replacing brake pads, dealing with customers who complained about prices. His hands would be covered in grease by noon, and his back would be screaming by the end of the day. But he could not afford to take time off. He had bills to pay. He had a daughter to feed. The inheritance was not guaranteed, and he refused to let hope make him careless. After work, he picked up his daughter from the after-school program. He helped her with homework, made dinner, gave her a bath, read her a bedtime story. Only when she was asleep did he return to the piano. He practiced until midnight, Sometimes later, his fingers stumbling through passages that used to come naturally. The Chopin Ballade was one of the hardest pieces ever written for piano. It was 12 minutes of emotional and technical challenges that had defeated countless professional musicians. There were runs that required lightning speed, chords that demanded enormous hand stretches, and dynamic shifts that could go from a whisper to a thunderstorm in a matter of seconds. He had played it beautifully once, years ago. His mother had been in the audience that night, and she had cried when he finished. She told him afterward that she had never been prouder of anything in her entire life. Now, sitting at the same piano she had played for decades, he could barely get through the opening measures without making mistakes. His injured hand was stiff and uncooperative. The tendons that had been damaged years ago did not want to stretch the way they used to. Every time he reached for a difficult chord, pain shot through his fingers like tiny bolts of electricity. By the end of the first week, he was ready to give up. He sat on the piano bench one night, his head in his hands, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. What was he thinking? He was a mechanic now, not a pianist. He had not touched these keys in 8 years. The family was right to laugh at him. He was a fool for even trying. His daughter found him like that. She had gotten out of bed to get a glass of water and saw him sitting in the dark, shoulders slumped, looking defeated. "Daddy," she said quietly, "are you okay?" He looked up at her and tried to smile, but it came out wrong. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Go back to bed." But she did not go back to bed. Instead, she walked over and climbed onto the bench beside him, just like she had done every night since he started practicing. She leaned her head against his arm and looked up at him with those big, trusting eyes. "Is the piano song too hard?" she asked. He let out a long breath. "Yeah, baby. It's really hard. But you've been practicing so much. You wake up early and stay up late. I hear you playing when I'm supposed to be asleep." He smiled a little at that. He thought he had been quiet enough not to wake her. "You hear that, huh?" She nodded. "It sounds pretty. Even when you make mistakes, it still sounds pretty to me." His throat tightened. He pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot." She was quiet for a moment, playing with the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Then she said, "Daddy, why do those people at the big house not like us?" He did not know how to answer that. How do you explain cruelty to a 7-year-old? How do you tell your child that some people judge others by how much money they have, what kind of car they drive, what clothes they wear? "I don't know, baby," he finally said. "Some people just don't understand that what matters most isn't stuff. It's not money or big houses or fancy cars. What matters is how you treat people, how you love them, how you show up for them even when it's hard." She thought about this for a moment. "Like how you show up for me. Exactly like that." She smiled and hugged him tighter. "Then you're the richest person I know, Daddy." He had to look away so she would not see the tears in his eyes. This little girl, with her worn-out rabbit and her thrift-store dresses, had just said the most profound thing he had ever heard. She understood something that the entire Harrington family had never grasped. That night, after she went back to bed, he sat at the piano with new determination. He thought about his mother, who had given up everything for love and never regretted it. He thought about his daughter, who believed in him even when he did not believe in himself. He thought about the people at the mansion with their expensive clothes and their cold hearts. And he realized something important. He was not doing this for the inheritance. He was not doing this to prove anything to Victoria or any of the others. He was doing this for his mother, who had taught him that music was a gift meant to be shared. He was doing this for his daughter, who deserved to see her father fight for something instead of giving up. He placed his fingers on the keys and started again from the beginning. The second week was slightly better. His fingers started to remember. The muscle memory that had been buried for 8 years began to surface, slowly, like a creature waking from a long hibernation. The runs were still messy, the chords still imperfect, but there were moments, brief, beautiful moments, when the music sounded like it used to. His boss noticed the change in him. He was showing up to work exhausted, with bags under his eyes and sometimes bandages on his fingers from practicing too hard. One afternoon, the boss pulled him aside and asked if everything was okay. He did not want to explain the whole story, so he just said he was dealing with some family stuff. The boss nodded and did not push further, but he did cut his hours slightly for the rest of the month. It meant less money, but it also meant more time to practice. He accepted the trade-off gratefully. His daughter became his biggest supporter. Every night she sat beside him on the piano bench, doing her homework or drawing pictures while he practiced. She never complained about the repetitive sounds. The same passages played over and over until they were right. She just sat there, keeping him company, believing in him. One night, near the end of the second week, he made it through the entire ballade without stopping. It was far from perfect. There were wrong notes, stumbles, places where the tempo fell apart, but he made it to the end, all 12 minutes, and when the last chord faded into silence, his daughter started clapping. "You did it, Daddy!" she cheered. "You played the whole thing!" He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. He scooped her up in his arms and spun her around while she giggled. For that one moment, all the exhaustion and doubt and pain melted away. There was only joy. He had one more week to get it right. One more week to turn this rough attempt into something worthy of his mother's memory. One more week to prepare for the biggest performance of his life. He did not know if he could do it. The piece was still rough, still unpolished, still full of flaws. His hands still ached after every practice session. His body was running on coffee and determination and very little sleep. But his daughter believed in him. His mother's spirit was with him, and somewhere deep inside, beneath all the doubt and fear, he was starting to believe in himself too. One more week. That was all he had. He sat back down at the piano and began again. The morning of the performance, he woke up before the sun. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the piano keys swimming in front of him, heard the opening notes of the ballade echoing in his head. His hands were trembling before his feet even touched the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the empty street below. The world was still dark and quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it is waiting for something to happen. In a few hours, he would be standing in front of people who wanted him to fail, people who had already decided he was nothing. His daughter was still asleep in her room. He peeked in and watched her for a moment. Her small body curled around her stuffed rabbit, her face peaceful and untroubled. She had no idea how much was riding on today. She just knew her daddy was going to play piano for some people, and she was excited to watch. He wished he could feel that simple about it. He made breakfast, scrambled eggs, and toast, though he could barely eat. His stomach was tied in knots. He kept flexing his fingers, stretching them, trying to warm them up. The injured hand felt stiff, like it always did in the morning. He had learned to work through it over the past 3 weeks, but today, the stiffness felt worse. Or maybe that was just fear playing tricks on him. His daughter woke up with a smile on her face. She was wearing her yellow dress again, the one with the white flowers. She had insisted on wearing it because she said it was her lucky dress. He did not have the heart to tell her that luck was not something he believed in anymore. They loaded into the old pickup truck and began the long drive to the mansion. His daughter chattered happily for the first hour, talking about school, about her friends, about a book her teacher had read to the class. He listened and nodded and answered when she asked questions. But his mind was somewhere else. It was already at that piano, already playing the first notes, already facing the judgment of strangers who shared his blood, but nothing else. Around the halfway point, his daughter grew quiet. She stared out the window at the passing trees and fields, and then she said something that nearly broke him. "Daddy, are you scared?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was watching him with those big, serious eyes that sometimes made her look much older than 7. "Yeah, sweetheart," he admitted. "I'm pretty scared." "Why?" He thought about how to answer. He did not want to burden her with the weight of what this meant. He did not want her to feel the pressure he was feeling. "Because I want to do a good job," he finally said. "I want to make your grandma proud, and I'm afraid I might mess up." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Daddy, remember when I had to sing that song at school? In front of everyone?" He remembered. It was a holiday concert last year. She had been so nervous she almost refused to go on stage. He had knelt down in front of her, held her hands, and told her that no matter what happened, he would be proud of her just for trying. "I remember," he said. "You told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing even when you are scared. That's what you said." He felt a lump form in his throat, his own words coming back to him through his daughter's voice. "You're right," he said softly. "I did say that." She smiled. "So be brave, Daddy. I'll be right there watching, and I'll be proud of you no matter what." He had to pull over for a minute. He told her he needed to check something on the truck, but really he just needed a moment to collect himself. He stood on the side of the road, hands on his knees, breathing deeply, trying not to cry. This little girl, this beautiful soul, had just given him the strength he needed. They arrived at the mansion just before noon. The circular driveway was full of expensive cars, just like before. The sky was gray and overcast, like even the weather was uncertain about what was going to happen. Inside, the family had already gathered in the music room. It was a space he had not seen during his first visit. A grand room with tall windows and velvet curtains, and a massive Steinway piano sitting in the center like a throne. The piano was black and gleaming, perfectly maintained, worth more than everything he owned. Victoria was already there, looking smug and satisfied. She had completed her task earlier in the week, some kind of presentation about investments and portfolios that had impressed the attorneys. She was standing near the fireplace with a glass of champagne, talking to relatives who laughed at everything she said. When he walked in, the room fell silent. Every head turned, every eye landed on him, measuring him, doubting him. He was wearing the same borrowed blazer as before, the same scrubbed work boots. His daughter held his hand tightly, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her other arm. Victoria stepped forward with a smile that was not friendly. "Well, well, you actually showed up. I thought for sure you would come to your senses and save yourself the embarrassment." He did not respond. He simply guided his daughter to a chair near the front of the room and helped her sit down. Then he turned and walked toward the piano. The room was absolutely silent. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His hands were sweating. His injured fingers throbbed with a dull ache. He sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. They were pristine, white and black, waiting. He thought about his mother sitting at her old worn piano every night, filling their tiny apartment with music. He thought about his daughter's voice in the truck. "Be brave, Daddy." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, soft and melancholic, the way Chopin had intended. Then the second note, then the third. The opening melody floated through the room like a whisper, fragile and beautiful. He kept his eyes closed. He did not want to see their faces. He did not want to see Victoria smirking or the relatives exchanging doubtful glances. He just wanted to play. He wanted to disappear into the music the way he used to, back when his mother was alive, back when playing felt like breathing. The ballade built slowly, the way a storm builds on the horizon. The quiet opening gave way to more complex passages, runs that cascaded up and down the keyboard, chords that demanded strength and precision. His fingers moved faster, surer, the muscle memory taking over. There were mistakes. He stumbled on a difficult transition in the middle section, hit a wrong note during one of the runs. But he did not stop. He could not stop. The music had taken hold of him, carrying him forward like a river current. He reached the climax of the piece, the thunderous section where Chopin poured all of his passion and heartbreak into the composition. His hands crashed down on the keys, filling the room with sound, with emotion, with everything he had been holding inside for 8 years. The grief of losing his mother, the struggle of raising his daughter alone, the pain of giving up the thing he loved most. It all came out through his fingers. And then, finally, the piece wound down to its quiet, devastating ending. The last few notes hung in the air like tears about to fall. He pressed the final chord, let it fade into silence, and slowly lifted his hands from the keys. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The room was completely still. Then his daughter started clapping. She stood up on her chair, her rabbit clutched to her chest, and clapped with all her might. Her small voice rang out across the silence. "That was so beautiful, Daddy." He turned to look at her, and there were tears streaming down his face. He did not care who saw. He did not care about anything except the little girl in the yellow dress who was beaming at him like he had hung the moon. One by one, other people in the room began to clap. The attorney, a few cousins who looked genuinely moved. Even some of the older relatives who had been skeptical before. Victoria was not clapping. She stood frozen by the fireplace, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, her face pale with shock. She had expected him to fail. They all had. But he had not failed. He had played with everything he had, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. The applause faded slowly, like ripples disappearing on still water. He remained seated at the piano, his hands resting on his lap, his heart still pounding from the performance. He felt emptied out, like he had poured everything inside of him into those 12 minutes, and now there was nothing left. His daughter ran across the room and threw her arms around him. He lifted her onto his lap and held her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo he had used to wash her hair that morning. She smelled like home. "You did it, Daddy," she whispered. "You were so good." He could not speak. He just nodded and held her tighter. The attorney cleared his throat and stepped forward. The room fell silent again, the tension returning like a cold wind. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The tasks were complete. Now came the judgment. "Thank you all for your patience over these past 3 weeks," the attorney began. "Each of you has completed the task assigned by Eleanor. Now it is time to reveal her final wishes." Victoria straightened up, smoothing her dress, preparing herself for the victory she believed was rightfully hers. The other relatives shifted in their seats, some hopeful, some nervous, all waiting. The attorney reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was cream-colored and thick, the kind of stationery that cost more than most people spent on groceries. Eleanor's handwriting was on the front, elegant cursive that spelled out a single word: family. "Before I read the distribution of assets," the attorney said, "Eleanor requested that I read a personal letter she wrote shortly before her passing. She was very specific that this letter be read aloud, in front of everyone, after all tasks were complete." He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The room was so quiet you could hear the paper crinkle. The attorney began to read. "To my family. If you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and you have each completed the tasks I designed for you. I hope those tasks taught you something about yourselves. I suspect For most of you, they only confirmed what I already knew." Victoria smiled slightly, assuming this was a compliment. The attorney continued. "For decades, I watched this family accumulate wealth and lose its soul. I watched children grow up believing that money was the measure of a person. I watched kindness become weakness and cruelty become strength. I watched my own daughter, my precious girl, walk away from everything because she understood something I was too blind to see." The attorney paused and glanced at the man sitting at the piano with his daughter in his arms. "My daughter chose love over inheritance. She chose a man who worked with his hands and came home tired every night, but never too tired to tell her she was beautiful. She chose a small apartment over a mansion, a used car over a limousine, a life of struggle over a life of ease. And I disowned her for it." The room was completely still. No one moved. No one breathed. "It is the greatest regret of my life. I was too proud, too stubborn, too afraid of what others would think. I let my daughter die without ever telling her I was sorry, without ever telling her I was wrong, without ever telling her that she was braver than I ever was." The attorney's voice wavered slightly. He took a breath and continued. "I have spent the last years of my life watching from afar. I hired people to keep me informed. I know that my grandson works at an auto shop and lives in a small apartment. I know that he raises his daughter alone, with no help from anyone. I know that he kept his mother's piano even when he could have sold it for rent money. I know that he has struggled and sacrificed and never once complained." Tears were streaming down his face now. He did not try to hide them. His daughter reached up and wiped one from his cheek with her small fingers. "The tasks I assigned were not tests of skill. They were tests of character. I asked my granddaughter to demonstrate financial expertise because I knew she would treat it as a competition to be won, not a lesson to be learned. I asked others to prove their charity and social standing because I knew they would see these as ways to show off, not opportunities to reflect." Victoria's smile had vanished. Her face was pale. "But I asked my grandson to play Chopin's ballade because I knew what it would require of him. I knew he had not touched a piano since his mother died. I knew about his injury. I knew that playing that piece would mean facing his grief, his fear, and his pain. I knew it would demand everything he had." The attorney looked up from the letter and directly at the man at the piano. "And I knew he would do it anyway. Not for the money, not to prove anything to anyone. He would do it for his mother. He would do it for his daughter. He would do it because that is who he is. That is who my daughter raised him to be." The attorney returned to the letter for the final section. "Therefore, it is my wish that the majority of my estate be left to my grandson, not because he earned it today, but because he has been earning it every day of his life through sacrifice, love, and quiet courage. The mansion will be sold, and the proceeds will be added to his inheritance. The remaining family members will receive modest sums, enough to remind them of what they could have had if they had chosen to be better." Victoria made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. No one moved to clean it up. "To my grandson, I say this. I am sorry I never knew you. I am sorry I let my pride keep me from your mother and from you, but I see her in everything I have learned about you. Her kindness, her strength, her refusal to let the world make her hard. Please do not let this money change who you are. Use it to build the life she would have wanted for you. Use it to give your daughter the opportunities you never had. And perhaps, if you can find it in your heart, forgive an old woman who learned too late what truly matters." The attorney folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "That concludes Eleanor's message." The room erupted. Victoria was shouting, demanding to see the documents, threatening lawsuits. Other relatives were arguing, some angry, some stunned, some quietly relieved. The attorney calmly explained that the will was ironclad, that Eleanor had worked with the best lawyers to ensure her wishes could not be contested. But he heard none of it. He was looking at his daughter, who was looking back at him with confusion in her eyes. "Daddy, what happened? Why is everyone yelling?" He smiled through his tears. "Your great-great-grandmother left us something, sweetheart. Something to help us have a better life. Because you played the piano? Because your grandma taught me to play the piano, and because she taught me to be kind and to work hard and to never give up on the people I love." His daughter smiled. "Grandma sounds nice. I wish I could have met her." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They walked out of the mansion together, hand in hand, leaving the chaos behind. The gray clouds had parted, and afternoon sunlight was streaming through, warming their faces as they stepped outside. He did not look back at the house or the expensive cars or the family that had never wanted him. He just looked at his daughter, skipping beside him, her rabbit bouncing in her arms, completely unaware that their lives had just changed forever. 1 year later, he opened a small music school in his hometown. He named it after his mother, using her maiden name so that her memory would live on in a place that taught children the joy of music. His daughter took her first official piano lesson there on opening day. He was her teacher. The Harrington family never spoke to him again. He considered that part of the inheritance, too. Some things, he had learned, were worth more than money. Love was one of them. Family, real family, was another. And music, the gift his mother had given him, was the thread that connected them all. He sat down at the piano in his new school, his daughter beside him on the bench, and began to play. This time there were no tears, only joy.